Marcus Devereux, a self-made tycoon, commanded a blend of fear and admiration. He was a man who transformed an unassuming beginning into a vast enterprise, an empire whose value dwarfed that of many nations. Yet, concealed beneath his polished suits and quiet demeanor, Marcus harbored a deep-seated wound that no amount of wealth could mend. It was a betrayal of trust, so profound it had rendered him emotionally barren. One Saturday morning, in a bustling city street, he deliberately let his wallet slip from his grasp before three strangers, then observed. Two individuals passed by without a second glance. One pocketed the cash it contained, but the third, a single mother whose footwear bore the signs of wear, performed an act with that wallet which brought the billionaire to his knees on the public pavement and irrevocably altered both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. Greetings, dear friends, and welcome to today's narrative. Before we proceed further, we kindly request that you like this video and subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss a story. Please also share in the comments section where you are tuning in from. Are you in Atlanta, Chicago, London, Texas, or New York? We genuinely appreciate hearing from you. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let us delve into this remarkable story, for this one is bound to resonate with you long after it concludes. The morning sun, filtered through the expansive windows of Marcus Devereux's estate, illuminated the surroundings with the characteristic grace found in spaces where every surface gleams, every object is pristine, and a palpable silence prevails. Its rays glided across polished marble floors, past crystal vases brimming with floral arrangements, replenished every 72 hours by a diligent housekeeper, and down a corridor so lengthy that an incautious utterance would surely echo. However, voices never rose to such a pitch within those walls, as there was no one present to address. The estate, spanning 6 acres just north of Buckhead, was shielded from the thoroughfare by imposing iron gates, so tall they completely obscured the residents from view. Access was granted by invitation only, a privilege seldom extended. Beyond these gates, a driveway meandered through groves of magnolia trees, their alabaster blossoms drooping heavily under the oppressive Georgia heat. At the culmination of this approach, the house presented itself, a vision, straight from the pages of a high-end magazine. Indeed, it had graced such publications on 2 separate occasions. 4 stories comprised the structure, housing 9 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms. A garage accommodated 6 vehicles, though Marcus exclusively utilized 2. The kitchen boasted a marble island of considerable dimensions comparable to a small vessel, and a swimming pool out back, maintained at a constant warmth year-round, remained unused for over a year. In the dining room, a table designed to seat 10 was occupied each and every morning by a solitary man, positioned at the far end, dining in utter isolation. Every aspect of the estate communicated a singular message. This man has triumphed, and Marcus Devereux had indeed achieved immense success. This much was undeniable. However, truth possesses a multifaceted nature. It can be simultaneously factual and incomplete. Marcus was 56 years of age. His upbringing was on the southern periphery of Atlanta, within a public housing complex where the hallways carried the mingled scents of industrial cleaner and cooking oils, and the elevator malfunctioned with such regularity that residents ceased reporting it. His mother, Dolores, juggled 2 employments. Mornings were spent at a downtown hotel, meticulously folding linens and scrubbing fixtures, while evenings were dedicated to a laundromat situated 3 blocks from their dwelling, sorting garments belonging to others until her fingertips cracked. His father departed when Marcus was merely 7 years old. There was no confrontation, no farewell, simply a Tuesday morning when the other side of their shared bed remained conspicuously empty and continued to be so. His mother never discussed his absence, choosing instead to intensify her labor. Observing her, something solidified within Marcus even at that tender age. A quiet, smoldering resolve began to form. Not precisely anger, but a steadfast determination, the kind that operates without fanfare, the kind that simply perseveres. He commenced on a modest scale. At 9 years old, he operated a makeshift stand on the sidewalk outside their apartment building dispensing lemonade in paper cups for 50 cents. By 12, he was engaged in lawn maintenance across neighborhoods requiring 3 bus journeys to reach. By 17, he was undertaking renovations on vacant properties, utilizing tools borrowed from a construction worker neighbor. He acquired plumbing skills from online video tutorials before such resources gained widespread credibility. Drywall techniques were learned from an accommodating employee at the hardware store who permitted him to observe and inquire, provided he remained unobtrusive. At 24, he purchased his inaugural real estate asset, a dilapidated duplex situated on a street largely avoided by the public. He meticulously restored it with his own hands, addressing every wall, every pipe, every fractured pane of glass. He sold it for $60,000 more than his initial investment. Subsequently, he acquired another property, and then yet another. 2 decades elapsed, and Marcus Devereux commanded apartment complexes, commercial centers, and mixed-use developments spanning Atlanta, Charlotte, and Memphis. His name adorned architectural landmarks. His signature graced contracts representing wealth beyond the comprehension of most individuals over multiple lifetimes. When Marcus entered a room, a palpable shift occurred. Attendees straightened their posture, spoke with heightened caution, and harbored unspoken desires. He possessed an uncanny ability to discern their intentions even before they articulated them. To the wider world, Marcus Devereux epitomized the pinnacle of self-made success. Yet, the world perceived only what Marcus permitted it to witness. Within the confines of that opulent residence, shielded by formidable iron gates, Marcus consumed his breakfast in solitary confinement each morning. This was not by preference, nor dictated by his schedule, but rather because there was, quite simply, no one else present. He would take his place at the far end of the expansive dining table, a plate of eggs and toast prepared by Mrs. Tillman, his discreet cook, before him, and he would eat in silence. It was not a serene silence, but one that imposed a heavy weight pressing down upon his shoulders. In this quiet, the delicate scrape of a fork against porcelain seemed unnaturally amplified. Mrs. Tillman would deliver his coffee precisely at 6:45 in the morning, offering a cordial, "Good morning, Mr. Devereux." He would respond with a nod. This interaction often constituted the entirety of his human contact until midday, and at times for the entire day. This was the authentic reality of Marcus Devereux's existence. The root cause of this isolation had a discernible form, or rather, 2 distinct forms. 2 instances of profound betrayal had erected the formidable barrier behind which he now resided. The first involved a man named Curtis. They had grown up together in the very same housing complex, sharing the same corridor and the same perpetually out-of-order elevator. Curtis represented the closest thing Marcus had to a brother. They had shared sustenance, confided their deepest secrets, and forged a bond that is forged only when individuals navigate shared hardships in unison. As Marcus's business began to flourish, Curtis approached him with a venture, a restaurant, his lifelong aspiration. He required an initial investment of $200,000. Marcus did not hesitate. He issued the check that very afternoon, foregoing the need for formal documentation or contractual agreements. Curtis was, in his estimation, family. That was sufficient. 3 months later, Curtis had vanished. The restaurant never materialized. The invested funds were never recovered. There was no communication, no explanation, merely an ominous silence. It was the kind of silence that implicitly answers every question one is too apprehensive to pose. That evening, Marcus remained sequestered in his vehicle within a parking garage for a span of 2 hours. He did not drive. He did not contact anyone. He simply sat, the engine off, the windows closed, gazing at the concrete wall before him, grappling with the incomprehensible reality of how an individual one held dear could abscond with such a significant portion of one's resources and disappear so effortlessly. He never found an answer. The second betrayal stemmed from his wife, Nadine. Their marriage had endured for 8 years, and for the majority of that period, Marcus held a sincere conviction that she was the sole individual who genuinely cherished him for his inherent self, not for the empire he had meticulously constructed. She possessed a warmth, a presence, and a laugh that instilled in him the fleeting hope that perhaps the world was not as cold as he had come to believe. He had confided in her to an extent he had never before shared with anyone. He recounted the narrative of his father's departure, the genesis of his entrepreneurial spirit with the lemonade stand, and those agonizing nights when his mother returned home, utterly exhausted, to the point of falling asleep upright at the kitchen table, her shoes still on. He bestowed upon Nadine every facet of his being, not merely financial assets, but also his time, his candor, and the vulnerable, unguarded aspects of himself that he had sequestered for years. And she had accepted them all. Upon the arrival of the divorce papers, Marcus's legal counsel uncovered a significant detail. A shell corporation, registered under the name of a relative, had been utilized by Nadine to systematically divert funds over the preceding 3 years of their marital union. Initially, these transfers were modest, but they progressively escalated. By the conclusion of this clandestine operation, she had successfully siphoned close to $2 million from their joint accounts into an entity Marcus was never meant to discover. He did not engage in public dispute. There were no outcries, no threats, no dramatic scenes. He simply affixed his signature to the legal documents, granting her release. That night, standing in the kitchen of his deserted residence, he felt a profound internal sealing, not a fracture, but a quiet closure, akin to a door being gently shut by someone who has irrevocably decided it will never be opened again. Subsequent to this event, Marcus Devereux ceased to place trust in others. This transformation was not abrupt or overtly expressed. It was a gradual, subtle shift, akin to the insidious onset of dangerous conditions. He would attend social functions, offering smiles. He would engage in handshakes at galas, endure dinners, and respond with appropriate laughter and carefully chosen words. However, should one observe him closely, a discerning gaze would detect an absence in his eyes. It was not a visible barrier, but its presence was palpable. If someone ventured too close, a subtle alteration would occur. His voice would attain an even tenor. His expression would become impassive. He would offer a polite nod and withdraw, not merely physically, but in his entirety. He had mastered the art of occupying a space without truly being present. He could sit across from an individual, appearing engaged, while his inner self remained ensconced in a distant realm, behind a locked door to which no one possessed a key. Mrs. Tillman, his housekeeper, was the sole individual who perceived this internal detachment with absolute clarity, primarily because she was the only constant presence in his daily life. She witnessed the untouched meals, observed him standing by the window in the evenings, his gaze fixed upon the garden, his countenance reflecting that of a man who had misplaced something of immense importance and could not recall its whereabouts. She never voiced her observations. It was not her prerogative, and Marcus never solicited her insight. Trust, in essence, is a form of currency, and Marcus Devereux had been profoundly bankrupt in this regard for an extended period. The concept first took tangible form on a Friday evening. Marcus had just departed a philanthropic gala held in the city's downtown core. These events were typically gatherings of affluent individuals adorned in expensive attire, writing checks, and indulging in a fleeting sense of self-satisfaction. He had fulfilled his obligation, extending his check, shaking hands, and posing for photographs. His participation was concluded. He settled into the rear seat of his vehicle as his driver navigated out of the hotel's parking structure, his attention drawn to the cityscape unfolding beyond the window. Atlanta by night, a symphony of headlights, streetlights, and the illuminated signage of restaurants. Figures of people moved along the sidewalks, engaged in conversation, living their unhurried, ordinary lives. The car came to a halt at a red signal near a bustling intersection. It was at this juncture that Marcus noticed it. A gentleman in a grey jacket was proceeding briskly along the pavement. As he walked, an object slipped from his rear pocket. A wallet. It landed on the asphalt with a slight skitter to the left. The man continued his stride, oblivious. 3 individuals traversed the path of the fallen wallet. The first, A woman in high heels cast a brief glance downwards before continuing on her way. The second, a young man with headphones, stepped directly over it. The third, an older gentleman carrying a briefcase, paused, surveyed the object, glanced around, and then proceeded onward. Subsequently, a young boy emerged. He could not have been more than 11 or 12 years old. He was carrying a carton of candy bars, the kind commonly sold by youths outside grocery establishments. He observed the wallet on the ground, retrieved it, and peered inside. He then closed it and began to run, not in retreat but in pursuit of the man. The boy apprehended him half a block later, tugged gently on his sleeve, and presented the wallet. The man in the gray jacket accepted it. He offered no word of thanks, nor did he meet the boy's gaze. He simply snatched the wallet, quickly assessed its contents, and resumed his walk, not even faltering in his pace. The boy remained stationary for a moment, then turned, returned to his designated corner, set down his box of candy bars, and recommenced his sales. Marcus had observed the entire episode through the automobile's window. The traffic signal transitioned to green. The vehicle advanced, but Marcus remained internally static. Something had lodged itself within him, a sensation both substantial and sharp, yet remarkably clear. That boy possessed nothing. He was fully aware that no reward awaited him. He understood that no one was observing his actions. Yet he returned the wallet nonetheless. Not because it was logical, but because it was the right thing to do. Marcus reclined against the plush leather upholstery, his gaze fixed on the car's ceiling. A thought began to coalesce. It was not a business-related consideration, nor a strategic maneuver. It was something different. He felt an imperative to ascertain whether that boy was an anomaly or if others like him existed. Individuals who would act with integrity when there was no compelling reason to do so, when the financial temptation was tangible, the pressure significant, and no one would ever know. He pondered this throughout the entirety of the drive home. He continued to reflect on it while seated in his study, a glass of water untouched before him. He was still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at the darkened ceiling of his bedroom when the idea crystallized. By morning, Marcus had formulated a plan. He would devise a test, a straightforward one, a wallet, his wallet, crafted from fine leather, a bifold design that felt substantial in one's grasp. Within its compartments, he would place $2,000 in cash, 2 credit cards, and one additional item, a photograph. It was small, no larger than a playing card, its edges tinged with the mellow hue of age. It depicted a boy, perhaps 10 years old, standing beside a woman in front of a brick structure featuring a metal railing and a fractured front step. The boy wore a smile. The woman, however, did not. She appeared too weary to smile, yet her hand rested upon the boy's shoulder, a gesture of steadfastness and resolve, indicative of someone determined not to relinquish their hold. That boy was Marcus. That woman was his mother. And that photograph represented the solitary item within the wallet that could not be replicated by financial means. Marcus selected a Saturday morning, a section of sidewalk teeming with activity near a commercial district on the western edge of the city. It was the kind of street where diverse individuals intersected. He dressed unassumingly. No suit, no timepiece, no decorative cufflinks. A plain button-down shirt, dark denim trousers, and pristine athletic footwear. He projected an image of normalcy. That was precisely the objective. His assistant, a bright young man named Devon, positioned himself 50 meters distant, discreetly holding a mobile device to record the proceedings without drawing undue attention. Marcus strolled casually along the sidewalk, the wallet held loosely at his side. When the opportune moment arrived, he allowed it to drop. The first individual encountered was Monique. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, attired in a tailored blazer and pressed trousers, moving with purpose, her mobile phone held to her ear. She was engaged in a conversation, her voice sharp and professional. The wallet landed on the pavement less than 2 feet from her trajectory. She cast a downward glance. Her eyes registered its presence. Then her gaze moved forward once more, as did her feet. She stepped past it without altering her pace, as if it were a mere imperfection in the pavement, something beneath her notice. Marcus retrieved the wallet. He proceeded another block. He deliberately dropped it again. The second person was Keisha. She was approximately 40 years old, standing at a coffee kiosk near the curb, meticulously counting coins from her palm to purchase a small beverage. The wallet landed adjacent to her left shoe. She looked down. She bent and retrieved it. She opened it. Her fingers bypassed the credit cards and located the cash. 20 $100 bills. She looked up, scanning left, then right. A prolonged, careful observation in each direction. She then folded the wallet closed, placed it discreetly into her handbag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked away. She did not look back. Marcus observed from across the street, his expression unreadable. He turned to Devon. Devon met his gaze, awaiting further instruction. Marcus remained silent. He procured a new wallet, identical to the first, containing the same amount of cash, the same credit cards, and the identical photograph tucked within its inner pocket. He walked 3 additional blocks to a quieter stretch of sidewalk near a discount store, its window displaying a hand-painted sale sign. He dropped the wallet one final time, and it was then that the third individual appeared. Darlene Washington. She was walking at a leisurely pace, not by choice but due to the small child clinging to her right hand, who possessed short legs and a penchant for pausing every few steps to point out various objects: a pigeon perched on a fence, a dog across the street, a dandelion pushing through a crack in the concrete. Darlene was 31 years old. In her left hand, she carried a plastic bag, the flimsy kind, prone to stretching at the handles, procured from the dollar store behind her. She wore a plain t-shirt, so frequently laundered that its collar had become soft and shapeless. Her attire consisted of faded jeans and shoes. The shoes, white athletic sneakers, once pristine, now bore a tired yellow-gray hue. The left shoe exhibited a small aperture near the toe, a tear in the fabric she had attempted to mend with adhesive, but the glue had subsequently peeled away, and the hole had reappeared. She walked with a subtle shift in her gait, favoring the outer edge of that foot, a habit so ingrained it had become imperceptible to her, a minute adjustment, a discreet effort to conceal an imperfection she could not afford to rectify. The wallet landed on the sidewalk approximately 4 feet ahead of her. She nearly stepped on it. "Mama, what's that?" the little girl Zuri inquired, pointing with the unreserved certainty of a child who has discovered something of interest. Darlene halted. She looked down. She briefly released Zuri's hand and bent to retrieve the object. It was heavier than she had anticipated. Good leather. She opened it. The first element that caught her eye was the money. 20 $100 bills, fanned out, slightly crisp. $2,000. She stared at it, her lips parting almost imperceptibly. $2,000 represented more than she earned in an entire month. $2,000 could cover rent, groceries, and the utility bill bearing a red delinquency notice currently resting on her kitchen counter. She looked from the money to Zuri, who had crouched down to examine a beetle on the sidewalk. Then her gaze returned to the money. However, her fingers moved past the cash, past the credit cards, to a small compartment on the inner flap, the photograph. A boy and his mother standing before a brick edifice adorned with a metal railing. The boy smiling, the mother's hand resting on his shoulder. The image was bordered by a yellowed patina, characteristic of photographs that have been carried for extended periods, handled frequently, and examined repeatedly. This was not a photograph carelessly lost within a wallet. This was a photograph that resided there. Darlene gazed at it for a considerable duration. Her thoughts did not turn to the potential purchases enabled by $2,000. Instead, she contemplated the individual who had lost it. She envisioned the boy in the photograph and the woman beside him, whose weariness conveyed a specific maternal fatigue, the kind that arises from excessive labor, insufficient sleep, and an unwavering silence regarding their burdens, for complaining would demand an expenditure of energy they simply did not possess. She noted that the building depicted behind them bore a striking resemblance to the one in which she had grown up. Darlene closed the wallet. She took Zuri's hand and began to walk, not away from the scene, but forward, her eyes scanning their surroundings. She was unaware that the man who had relinquished the wallet was observing her every move from 50 meters behind. She did not know she was undergoing a trial. She did not comprehend that her entire existence was on the precipice of transformation due to her subsequent actions. She was cognizant of only one truth. This wallet did not belong to her, and somewhere, someone was missing it. Darlene Washington had not always carried such a profound weariness. There was a time, long ago now, when she was simply a girl with braided hair and scraped knees, her laughter echoing through the corridors of a housing complex on Atlanta's west side, and the world had seemed vast, full of potential, and devoid of the anxieties she had since come to know. She grew up in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the stairwell carried the distinct aromas of bleach and cooking oil, and the elevator functioned at best half the time. Her mother, Lorraine, was a prep cook at a downtown restaurant. Not an upscale establishment, but one with laminated menus and a lunch rush that commenced promptly at 11:30 and concluded no earlier than 2 o'clock. Lorraine departed their apartment each morning at 5 and returned around 7 in the evening, frequently bringing something with her. A styrofoam container holding perhaps rice and beans, chicken, or simply bread rolls and a cup of soup, whatever remained unsold from the day's offerings, whatever the manager permitted her to take. Darlene and her younger brother Jamal would sit at the small kitchen table, consuming whatever sustenance the container held, while Lorraine sat opposite them, observing their meal and refraining from partaking herself until they had finished. She invariably claimed to have already eaten at work. For years, Darlene accepted her mother's explanation. She was 14 years old before the truth dawned upon her that her mother had been weaving a tapestry of untruths. Lorraine possessed a guiding principle, a mantra she'd utter with the same quiet solemnity some mothers invoke before a meal, a firm declaration akin to a law etched into the very bedrock of their home. "Darling," she would say, "we never claim what doesn't belong to us, not even when our stomachs ache with hunger, and especially not when we're starving." Darlene had absorbed this admonition countless times. It echoed when she discovered a $5 bill on the laundromat floor and contemplated keeping it. It resurfaced when Jamal returned home with a plaything gifted by a classmate, prompting Lorraine to insist he return it. It even surfaced when their landlord, in a moment of questionable accounting, had added $40 to their monthly rent, a sum Lorraine paid without protest, uncertain if it was an error and unwilling to accuse someone without concrete proof. Such was Lorraine's character, an unwavering beacon of integrity, carried with the same vigilance as a treasured possession, always close, even when such steadfastness incurred a cost. Darlene was 19 when she lost her mother. It occurred on a Tuesday. Lorraine was at the diner, concluding her evening shift. While tending to the dishes in the cramped rear kitchen, she succumbed. A stroke. Swift, unexpected, and definitive, as all the most devastating events often are. By the time emergency services arrived, Lorraine was unresponsive. By the time Darlene reached the hospital, having rushed from her supermarket job on the night shift, still clad in her employee identification and apron, an oversight born of shock, it was too late. The sterile corridor remained etched in Darlene's memory, a scene she would forever recall. The incessant hum of the fluorescent lights, a sound so characteristic of places where sorrow resides, a low, persistent drone that burrowed into one's consciousness and refused to depart. A nurse, with a gentle demeanor, met her at the entrance to the room and uttered words of solace that Darlene barely registered, her hearing seemingly failing the instant she glimpsed her mother's face through the glass pane. Lorraine appeared serene. It was the observation shared in the aftermath, and it held a peculiar truth, and it fueled Darlene's resentment. Serenity, she felt, was for those who had chosen to embrace rest. Her mother had made no such choice. She had been taken in the midst of her labor, washing dishes for others, in a kitchen that wasn't hers, within a building she didn't own, for a pittance that was never sufficient. Darlene sat by her mother's bedside, clasping her hand. It still held a trace of warmth. Tears did not fall then. She remained there until the warmth ebbed away, and then lingered a while longer, for to depart meant acknowledging the finality, a reality she was not yet prepared to confront. Subsequently, everything shifted, much like how life recalibrates when the very pillar holding it all together is suddenly removed. Darlene withdrew from her community college studies. She assumed responsibility for their apartment lease. She guided Jamal through his final 2 years of high school, working demanding double shifts, diligently signing permission slips, and waiting in his school's parking lot on report card days, a promise made to Lorraine that she would uphold. Jamal enlisted in the army the month following his graduation. He was presently stationed abroad. He sent money whenever his circumstances allowed. It was never a substantial sum, yet Darlene never expressed dissatisfaction, for that was not her nature. At 26 years of age, she encountered Terence. He possessed a gentle spirit and a playful wit, and he regarded her with a gaze that hadn't graced her in a considerable duration, a look that conveyed she was someone worthy of commitment. He pledged his constancy, a vow he voiced with unwavering conviction, and for a fleeting period she found herself believing him. Zuri entered their lives 7 months after Terence's departure. He left no farewell message, no explanation. He simply ceased to return. One day, the contact number he had provided became defunct, and Darlene found herself adrift once more. But this time, her solitude was compounded. She was alone with an infant, a looming rent obligation, and a sorrow that had layered itself upon the existing grief, much like fresh paint concealing a fissure in a wall while the underlying damage persisted unseen. Now Darlene stood at 31 years old. She juggled 2 occupations. Mornings were spent at a downtown hotel where she meticulously made beds, scrubbed bathrooms, and folded towels with such precision they appeared untouched. Evenings were at a grocery store on the east side, scanning merchandise, bagging produce, and offering the perfunctory "have a good evening" to patrons who rarely met her gaze. Zuri attended a complimentary daycare program operated by a church 3 blocks from their residence. Darlene would drop her off at 6:45 each morning and collect her at 6:15 each evening, and in the interim, she navigated her days with a deliberate slowness, a labored progression akin to moving through water. The rent was a month overdue. The electricity bill bore a crimson notice printed on a distinctively heavier paper, as if the very material conveyed an inherent threat. The refrigerator contained a meager half-gallon of milk, a package of sliced cheese, some leftover rice, and a jar of peanut butter that Zuri consumed with a spoon, a consequence of Darlene's oversight in purchasing bread, an omission she hesitated to voice aloud. And then there were the shoes, the white sneakers marred by a conspicuous hole near the left toe. Darlene had acquired them 2 years prior from a discount retailer for $19. At the time, they had served their purpose adequately, clean and robust, unpretentious in their utility. However, 2 years of traversing bus routes, enduring the prolonged standing on hotel room floors, and pacing the aisles of the grocery store had taken their inevitable toll, as time invariably does on footwear of lesser quality. They had worn thin, developed splits. The opening near the left toe yawned like a small exposed mouth. Darlene attempted to mend it with adhesive, only for it to reopen, prompting another application of glue until eventually the adhesive lost its hold. She now adjusted her gait, walking predominantly on the outer edge of her left foot, a minute alteration in her stride, so subtle that it would likely go unnoticed by anyone not observing with extreme scrutiny. Each contemplation of purchasing new footwear initiated a swift calculation in her mind. $19 equated to 3 gallons of milk, or 2 multi-packs of diapers she no longer required, though Zuri's pull-ups approximated the same cost, or half the monthly electricity bill, or the difference between a timely rent payment and one that was late. Thus, the shoes remained. And Darlene continued to walk with an altered gait on her left foot, and she offered no complaint. Not out of mere bravery, though she possessed it in abundance, but because voicing dissatisfaction consumed precious energy, and energy was a commodity she could ill afford to squander. Those worn-out shoes narrated a silent chronicle, a ledger detailing every sacrifice made without a murmur, Every dollar strategically diverted to Zuri's needs over her own. Every morning, she'd glance in the mirror and defer her personal requirements for yet another day. And somewhere, beneath the surface of this relentless exertion, this quiet, unyielding effort to sustain a life with so little, Lorraine's voice persisted, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. "Darling," it would say, "we never claim what isn't ours, not even when we're hungry, especially when we're hungry." Darlene proceeded up the street, a wallet in one hand, Zuri's small fingers clasped in the other. She approached the first individual she encountered, a gentleman in a baseball cap laden with grocery bags. "Excuse me?" she inquired. "Did you happen to drop a wallet?" "Brown leather, about this size." The man shook his head and continued on his way. She repeated the inquiry to a woman at the crosswalk, receiving the same negative response. She then addressed a teenager engrossed in his mobile phone, leaning against a lamppost. He regarded her as if she were speaking an unfamiliar tongue, offered a shrug, and returned his attention to his screen. Zuri tugged at her hand. "Mama, can we go home? I'm tired." "Just a little longer, my sweet. Someone is missing this." She walked another block. The afternoon sun bore down with a heavy, languid intensity, the kind of late-day warmth that settles upon a city like a comforting embrace. Vehicles moved at a leisurely pace through the intersection ahead. A vendor offered bottled water from a cooler on the corner. In the distance, muffled music emanated from a parked car, its windows obscuring the source. Darlene paused at a coffee shop near the block's end, a modest establishment adorned with a chalkboard menu and two metal tables positioned on the sidewalk. She entered and addressed the young woman behind the counter. "Did anyone come in asking about a lost wallet? It was brown leather and had some cash inside." The young woman responded with a shake of her head. "No, ma'am. No one." Darlene offered her thanks and returned outside. Zuri had already clambered onto one of the metal chairs, her head resting on the tabletop, her small legs dangling beneath the seat. Darlene sat beside her, lifting Zuri onto her lap. She held the wallet with both hands and reopened it. Beyond the currency, past the assortment of cards, lay a photograph. She examined it more closely this time. The boy depicted in the image appeared to be around 10 years old, clad in a simple white t-shirt. His smile was broad and uninhibited, the kind of unburdened expression characteristic of children who have yet to experience life's complexities. Beside him stood a woman, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. She wasn't smiling. Weariness was evident on her face. Yet her hand conveyed a steadfastness, a resolute grip reminiscent of someone determined not to relinquish their hold. The building in the background was constructed of brick, featuring a metal railing and a cracked front step. Darlene recognized such architecture. She had grown up in a structure strikingly similar. She had ascended countless stairs like those. She had stood on steps identical to that one, awaiting her mother's return from work. Who was this boy? Did he comprehend that someone had preserved this photograph for so long? Did he understand the significance of carrying such an image within a wallet handled daily? She was unaware that the boy in the photograph was standing a mere 30 meters away at that very moment. She did not know that he had been observing her for 20 minutes, that he had witnessed her discovery of the wallet, that he had seen her close it without appropriating its contents, that he had watched her proceed down the block, inquiring of strangers if they had misplaced it, that he had seen her settle onto that metal chair with her daughter in her embrace, her gaze fixed upon his mother's likeness with an expression he hadn't encountered in a considerable time. Gentleness. Not pity nor curiosity, but a profound gentleness, born of recognition, of shared understanding. And he had noticed her footwear. Marcus Devereaux stepped away from the storefront where he had been standing and advanced towards her. His pace was measured, his countenance composed, yet within his chest a subtle shift occurred, a release of a burden he had carried for so long that its presence had become subconscious, a stone finding a new equilibrium after years of immobility. Darlene observed his approach. She rose, shifting Zuri to her hip with one arm while extending the wallet with the other. "Excuse me, sir," she began. "Is this yours?" Marcus's gaze fell upon the wallet. Then it met hers. Then, almost involuntarily, His eyes drifted to her footwear, the white sneakers, the worn patch near the left toe, the adhesive that had failed. He returned his attention to her eyes. They were steady, large, and dark, utterly composed, the eyes of an individual who possessed an intrinsic honesty, not one merely performing it. A few moments elapsed. Traffic flowed behind them. A distant car horn sounded. Zuri stirred on Darlene's hip, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice quiet. "It is." Darlene placed the wallet into his hand. A small smile, tinged with fatigue at its edges, touched her lips. "I'm glad I found you," she said, her gaze lingering on the photograph within. It seemed to hold significance. She then adjusted Zuri on her hip, turned, and began to walk away. Marcus remained on the sidewalk, watching her depart. He made no move to call out to her, not yet. He opened the wallet. The cash remained, all of it, $2,000 neatly fanned as he had left it. The credit cards were untouched, and the photograph, his mother and his 10-year-old self, resided in its usual place within the inner pocket. She possessed nothing, and she had taken nothing. It was at that precise moment that Marcus Devereaux experienced a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He lacked a definitive term for it, but it possessed roots. Marcus drove home that evening in contemplative silence, eschewing the radio and any phone calls. He allowed the cityscape to drift past his windows, a panorama of lights, storefronts, and individuals navigating their evening routines, all while his thoughts revolved around a woman whose shoes bore a hole, yet who had held $2,000 in her grasp and returned it. He steered through the imposing iron gates, parked within the garage, and proceeded directly to his study. He bypassed the supper Mrs. Tillman had thoughtfully prepared, covered in foil, as was her custom. He approached his desk, removed the wallet from his pocket, and placed it before him. He opened it to the photograph. He had scrutinized this image countless times, it having resided in his wallet for over 2 decades. Yet tonight, his perception had altered. Tonight, he truly saw his mother, Dolores Devereaux. 5 feet 3 inches tall, her hands perpetually chapped, her shoes always well worn, a woman who cleaned rooms and folded linens for others, never once absconding with so much as a bar of soap from a hotel bathroom, even when their own supply at home was depleted, even when it would have been so simple and so undetectable. He gazed at the woman in the photograph and perceived another woman before him, younger, with a different face, yet possessing the same eyes, the same worn shoes. He laid the photograph down and reclined in his chair. The house exuded a profound silence, a stillness that felt oppressive rather than peaceful. He retrieved his phone and dialed Devon. "The woman from today," Marcus stated, his voice measured. "The third one I encountered. I need you to identify her." Devon, accustomed to Marcus's often unspoken directives, simply replied, "I'll begin with the surveillance footage from today and investigate the coffee shop. I should have something by morning." By 9 o'clock the following morning, a file lay on Marcus's desk. Darlene Washington, age 31, single mother to a 5-year-old daughter, employed at 2 establishments, a hotel and a grocery store. Her current residence was a 4th-floor walk-up apartment in a West Side building. Rent status, 1 month in arrears, no savings, and no immediate family in the city other than her daughter. Marcus perused the file with meticulous attention, akin to his review of legal contracts, ensuring no detail was overlooked. However, this was not a contractual document. It was a life, distilled into a few lines on a page, each line conveying a singular message. She possessed virtually nothing. He set the file aside and placed his hands flat on his desk, remaining perfectly still. A thought, unbidden and quiet, like the most profound realizations, settled upon him. "I have dedicated 30 years to amassing a fortune," he mused, "and the most valuable possession I own is a photograph that a woman with holes in her shoes could have sold but chose to return." He sat with this contemplation for a considerable duration. Outside, the morning light slowly illuminated the garden. The fountain played its perpetual, indifferent tune. He recalled Monique, who had seen the wallet and walked past it. He harbored no resentment towards her. Some individuals simply fail to pay attention, an oversight, not a transgression, a form of slumber. He then considered Keisha, who had retrieved the wallet, observed its contents, and taken the money. He felt no anger towards her either, not truly. He understood the stark calculations of desperation, the compelling allure of $2,000 when one's bank account is utterly depleted. He was not incensed by her actions. He was not angry at either of them. He was weary, profoundly weary of being perpetually correct about human nature, weary of the narrative he had perpetuated for so long that it had become his sole truth. People will always take. It is their inherent nature, and if you are naive enough to trust them, you invite the consequences. But Darlene had abstained. Darlene, who required the funds more acutely than the other two, who had a daughter to nourish, a rent payment she could not meet, and shoes disintegrating on her feet, had held that wallet with both hands and traversed the city block under the oppressive afternoon sun, inquiring of strangers if they had misplaced their belongings. She had disproven his deeply ingrained cynicism, and the sensation of being wrong had never before offered such profound solace. A subtle adjustment occurred within his chest that night, not a dramatic upheaval, but a minor realignment, akin to a stone settling after prolonged exposure to the rain. Almost imperceptible. Almost everything. He remained awake, lying in his expansive bed, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to a boy hawking confectionery on a street corner, to a mother bringing home restaurant leftovers, to a wallet abandoned on a sidewalk, and to a woman who returned it, to shoes with holes and the true meaning they conveyed. By the time dawn broke, Marcus had reached a decision. 3 days later, Marcus Devereaux emerged from his garage, not in the Bentley, not in the Range Rover, nor in any of the 4 other polished vehicles awaiting their turn. He drove the Honda Accord, a silver 2003 model, bearing a scratch on its rear bumper and a minor dent on the passenger door that he had never bothered to repair. It was the first automobile he had ever purchased, acquired the year his business began to flourish, and it had remained in his garage ever since, not for its monetary value, but for its authenticity. He drove across the city, past the towering office buildings, through the bustling shopping districts, and beyond the enclaves where residences grew grander and lawns more expansive. He then proceeded to a point where the landscape began to reverse. Houses diminished in size, lawns vanished, buildings aged, paint peeled, and streets teemed with individuals moving with the purposeful gait of those burdened by significant weight. He parked on a street he hadn't visited in years, yet recognized instantly as it mirrored the street of his childhood. Similar structures, comparable storefronts, and an atmosphere thick with the mingled sense of food, exhaust fumes, music drifting from open windows, and the low thrum of a neighborhood perpetually awake, where rest was an unattainable luxury for many. Darlene's building stood on the corner. 4 stories, no elevator. The exterior paint flaked in patches as if the wall had begun to shed its skin and then faltered. The front door was propped open by a brick. Marcus entered. The stairwell was narrow, the handrail loose. On the second floor, a television played, its sound muffled and tinny from behind a closed door. On the third floor, a child's bicycle leaned against the wall, one training wheel conspicuously absent. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed and flickered as if engaged in a hesitant deliberation between illumination and darkness. He reached the 4th floor, apartment 4C. He paused before the door. He could discern movement within, the sound of a child's voice, the gentle rush of running water. He knocked 3 slow, deliberate times. The door opened, revealing Darlene, clad in a Navy hotel uniform, her name tag clipped to the pocket. Her hair was pulled back, and her face bore the distinct imprint of exhaustion, a fatigue born not of a single sleepless night, but of years of insufficient rest accumulated one atop the other. She looked at Marcus. She blinked once, then recognition dawned. "You're the man with the wallet." "I am," Marcus confirmed. "I apologize for the unannounced visit. I was hoping I might speak with you for a moment." Darlene's gaze briefly swept past him, a habitual scan of the hallway characteristic of someone receiving an unexpected visitor at their door. She then met his eyes again. Her glance flickered behind her into the apartment, and Marcus caught a glimpse of it. A compact, orderly space, meticulously arranged in the precise manner of those who optimize limited square footage. A sofa draped with a faded cloth, a small table with 2 chairs, children's artwork affixed to the refrigerator with strips of masking tape. She stepped aside. "Come in." Marcus entered the apartment with a practiced carefulness, a tall man instinctively making himself smaller in a confined space. He was acutely aware of every surface, every detail. On the shelf above the television, a framed picture of a woman resided. Near the entryway, a pair of small pink sneakers sat. Beside the couch, a collection of children's storybooks was piled on the floor. Zuri emerged from the interior corridor, her progress halted upon noticing Marcus, and she tilted her head upwards, her large, uncertain eyes conveying a child's assessment of whether an unfamiliar person was intriguing or unnerving. "Are you Mama's acquaintance?" she inquired. Marcus opened his mouth, then resealed it. Darlene provided the response for him. "He's someone Mama assisted recently, dear. Please go play in your quarters for a short while." Zuri contemplated this suggestion. Subsequently, she turned and retraced her steps down the hall, glancing back once before vanishing through a door. Darlene gestured towards the compact kitchen table. Marcus settled onto a plastic seat that groaned under his weight. She moved to the counter and began preparing a kettle. She reached into a cupboard and retrieved 2 mugs. They were a mismatched set. One was white with a chipped edge. The other was green, adorned with a faded floral design. She dropped a tea bag into each. Marcus observed these cups, and a realization struck him with such sudden force that he had to grasp the table's edge. His own mother had brewed tea in dissimilar cups every single morning, in a kitchen that bore a striking resemblance to this one. A kettle on the stovetop, 2 cups from various sets that had been broken and scattered over the years until nothing seemed to align anymore, yet the tea retained its familiar taste. Darlene placed a cup before him. She then took a seat opposite him at the table with her own. She did not inquire about his preferences. She simply waited. Marcus enveloped the cup with both hands. The warmth permeated his palms. He met Darlene's gaze. She returned his look, patient, unhurried, comfortable with the quietude in a way that most individuals were not. "I must convey something to you," he stated. His voice was measured, yet an underlying tremor betrayed him. "That wallet. I did not misplace it inadvertently." Darlene's cup paused mid-journey to her lips. She set it down deliberately. She regarded him. She remained silent. The kitchen was hushed. The kettle on the stove emitted a ticking sound as it cooled. From somewhere within the building, a door closed. From Zuri's room, the faint murmur of a young girl speaking softly to herself reached them. Darlene observed Marcus across the modest table in the small kitchen of the compact apartment that contained her entire world, and she waited. Marcus recounted everything. He spoke with a deliberate pace, the manner of a man aware that his words might carry a significant cost. He described the social gathering, the young individual with the confectionery items, the notion that had disrupted his sleep at 3 a.m, the wallet, the currency, the photograph, Monique, who had passed by, Keisha, who had taken it, the experience of standing 50 meters away and witnessing 3 strangers respond to a question they were unaware they were being posed. He shared the entirety of it, and upon his conclusion, the kitchen fell into profound quiet. Darlene offered no smile. She did not nod. She uttered no words of thanks, nor expressed any fascination, nor anything that a person might say to fill the silence with a measure of comfort. Her demeanor shifted. Not drastically, but the warmth that had been present moments before, the openness, the willingness to share a table with an unknown person and offer them tea in a cup with a damaged rim, something within that transformation altered, cooled, akin to a window closing on a pleasant day. "So you were assessing individuals," she remarked. Her voice was even, cautious, as if conducting an experiment. Marcus did not reply immediately. He perceived it, the subtle sharpness. Not precisely anger, something more subdued than wrath and more keen than disappointment. "I did not return that wallet to undergo an examination," Darlene stated. She looked directly at him. "I returned it because it was not mine." The utterance settled in the space like a substantial object placed upon a surface. Uncomplicated, definitive, not defensive, simply factual. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He gazed at the teacup warming his hands and then at the woman seated opposite him, and for the first time in a considerable period, Marcus Devereux lacked a plan. He possessed no subsequent action. He had entered this dwelling as an individual accustomed to commanding spaces, and now he found himself in a plastic chair in a kitchen the size of his walk-in wardrobe, being admonished by a woman whose monthly earnings were less than his expenditure on a single evening meal. And she was correct. "You are right," he conceded, "and I offer my apologies." Darlene scrutinized him, not his attire nor his posture, but his eyes. She observed him with the same care she had applied to the photograph within the wallet, as if seeking the person concealed beneath the surface, and she discovered him in the manner that certain individuals can. Not through an effort to impress, manipulate, or position themselves, but because they have endured sufficient hardship to recognize distress in others, because suffering imparts the ability to perceive pain, if one permits it. "You did not arrive here to express gratitude," she stated softly. "You came because you required someone to engage with you authentically." Marcus remained motionless. The kind of stillness that is not composed, but rather the stillness that occurs when someone has articulated the very thing you have been avoiding acknowledging to yourself. "I've not experienced that in a considerable time," he replied. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator emitted a low hum. From further down the corridor, Zuri's delicate footsteps padded across the floor, and then she appeared in the doorway, rubbing one eye with her fist. "Mama, are we having supper?" Darlene glanced at her daughter. "In a little while, dear. Go play for a few more minutes." Zuri looked at Marcus, then at her mother. Subsequently, she turned and padded back down the hallway, her small feet making virtually no sound. Darlene's attention returned to Marcus. The coolness in her expression had not dissipated, but it had undergone a subtle shift. There was an additional element present now. Not confidence, not yet, but the nascent stage of a decision, a door not fully opened, but no longer secured. "I cannot be purchased," she declared, "but I can listen." And then Darlene shared her story about Lorraine. She did not recount it because he had requested it. He had not asked. She spoke because she recognized his need to hear something genuine, and the most authentic narrative she possessed was that of her mother. She described a woman who would awaken at 4:30 each morning, don her customary worn-out footwear, and journey to a bus stop in the pre-dawn darkness because the eatery did not provide adequate remuneration for a vehicle, and the bus would arrive at 5:15. And if she missed it, she would be late. And if she was tardy, she would forfeit the shift. And if she lost the shift, there would be no meal that evening. She spoke of the styrofoam containers, the rice and beans, the bread rolls, and the cups of soup, and the way Lorraine would arrange the food on the table and sit with her children, professing to have already eaten, when in fact she had not, when she was famished, when she had been hungry throughout the entire day. She repeated the saying, the one Lorraine uttered as if it were a prayer. "Child, we do not take what is not ours, not even when we are hungry, particularly when we are hungry." She explained how she used to believe it was merely a maternal platitude akin to "be good" or "say please." But as she matured, she grasped its deeper significance. It was a guiding principle, a method of navigating a world that did not facilitate honesty, a decision Lorraine made each day, repeatedly, when no one was observing, and no one would have censured her had she chosen differently. She recounted the night her mother passed away. Her voice was slow. It did not waver, but it carried a profound gravity, the kind of weight that accumulates from bearing a burden for so long that the act of carrying itself becomes an intrinsic part of you. She described the telephone call, the visit to the supermarket, The hurried sprint of 6 blocks in her work apron because she lacked a vehicle and could not afford a taxi, and the bus would take too long, the scene in the hospital corridor, and the buzzing fluorescent light, a sound perpetually present in places where the gravest news awaits. She related her arrival too late, her sitting beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, the hand being warm, her remaining there until it was not. "I remained there until her hand grew cold," Darlene stated, "because departing signified its finality, and I was not prepared for it to conclude." Marcus remained immobile. "Following the funeral," Darlene continued, "I examined her belongings, her wardrobe. It was small. Everything within it was aged. She never purchased anything new for herself. She wore the same 3 ensembles to work for years. And at the bottom of the closet, concealed beneath a folded blanket, I discovered an envelope." She paused, her gaze falling to the table. "I opened it. There was currency enclosed. Cash. I counted it." She swallowed. $340. She fell silent again. The kitchen was utterly still. $340. My mother's entire life's savings, allocated for footwear. Marcus's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes betrayed emotion. "There was a message," Darlene revealed, "penned in her handwriting. Merely 3 words. For Darlene's shoes." She pressed her lips together. The heaviness in her chest, the one she had carried since the night she ran 6 blocks to a hospital and arrived too late, it pressed against her ribs, just as it always did when she spoke her mother's name aloud. Not a sharp discomfort, not the kind that elicits a cry, but the kind that persists, weighty, constant, the kind one learns to breathe around. "I did not purchase shoes," she said. "I used it to pay the rent, and I continued wearing the old ones, and I will keep wearing them until they completely disintegrate, because each time I look down at those shoes, I see her." Marcus lowered his gaze. Beneath the table, illuminated by the dim light of the small kitchen, Darlene's shoes were discernible, the white sneakers worn out. He studied them for an extended period. Then he looked up, his eyes glistening. He did not speak. There were no words that could convey more value than the silence. Thus, he allowed it to persist, and Darlene permitted it to remain. And for a few moments, 2 individuals who had originated from similar circumstances and found themselves in vastly different ones sat at a modest table in a small kitchen, exchanging no words. And that silence held more truth than any verbal expression either of them could have formulated. A week elapsed before Marcus initiated his subsequent action, and when he did, he proceeded with caution. He did not summon Darlene to the estate. He did not dispatch a vehicle. He contacted her by telephone, obtaining the number from Devon's records, and posed the question simply and directly. Would she be amenable to visiting his office the subsequent Tuesday at 10 in the morning? She inquired as to the reason. He responded, "Because I wish to present something to you, and I desire to do so appropriately." She was silent for a moment. Then she agreed, "I shall be there." She arrived at 10:05, 5 minutes behind schedule, as the bus had taken an alternate route, and Zuri had paused twice on their walk from the bus stop to observe various objects. A fire hydrant, a dog behind a fence. Zuri noticed everything. That was Zuri. Darlene was attired in her most presentable clothing, a blouse she had ironed that morning on the kitchen counter, as she did not possess an ironing board, dark trousers, clean, simple, and the shoes, the same shoes, the white sneakers, with a discernible hole near the left toe. She had made no attempt to conceal them. She had not borrowed a different pair. She had arrived precisely as she was. That was Darlene. The edifice was imposing and constructed of glass, and every aspect of it communicated affluence in the understated, refined manner that genuine wealth speaks. Darlene navigated the lobby, carrying Zuri on her hip, and provided her name to the receptionist, who made a telephone call, then smiled, and instructed her to proceed to the 14th floor. The elevator was the most silent elevator Darlene had ever experienced. Zuri pressed her face against the glass partition and watched the cityscape diminish below them, exclaiming, "Mama, we are flying!" Almost dear. Marcus met them at the elevator's threshold. He was dressed in a suit but had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He appeared different here than he had in her kitchen, more imposing, more self-assured, more akin to the sort of man whose name adorned buildings. However, when he addressed Zuri and said, "Hello again," a subtle softening occurred in his features, and for a fleeting moment he resembled precisely as he had in her kitchen. Like a man earnestly endeavoring to achieve something correctly, he guided them down a corridor and into a conference room furnished with a long table and windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Atlanta sprawled below them in the morning light, expansive, brilliant, and bustling. Zuri pressed her hands against the window and gazed intently. Marcus closed the door. On the conference table, 3 items were arranged in a line, not centrally placed, but simply set there as one might arrange objects on a kitchen table. The initial item was a shoebox, white, unadorned, the kind obtainable at any standard shoe retailer. The second was an envelope, small, plain, sealed. The third was a document comprising several pages bound together with a clip. Marcus looked at Darlene. "Please, have a seat." She complied. Zuri clambered onto the chair beside her and commenced drawing invisible forms on the polished table with her finger. Marcus first pushed the shoebox towards her. "Open it." She lifted the lid. Within lay a pair of white sneakers, not designer, not costly, the same style as the ones she wore. Simple, clean, new. She regarded them. Then she met Marcus's gaze. "They cost $65, he stated. "They are not exceptional. However, they originate from someone who comprehends the significance of footwear to you." Darlene touched the laces. She did not remove them from the box. She merely brushed them lightly, as one might touch an object that possesses a meaning far beyond its apparent form. Marcus then slid the envelope towards her. "Open it." She picked it up. It felt light. She tore open the seal and peered inside. Currency. She withdrew it and began counting, her hands slowing and then ceasing their movement. $340. She looked at Marcus. Her lips parted. No sound emerged. "This is your mother's money," Marcus conveyed. His voice was exceptionally soft. "I am not bestowing this upon you. I am returning it. She had set it aside for your shoes. I merely ensured it reached its proper destination." Darlene's hands began to tremble. She placed the money on the table with extreme care, as one might set down a fragile item. She flattened both hands against the surface and inhaled a breath that came in uneven gasps, the kind of breath that strains to maintain composure but falls short. Marcus then advanced the document towards her. He waited until her attention was fixed upon it. Then he spoke. "This is an offer of employment. A role designated as community liaison within a foundation I'm establishing. The foundation provides support to single mothers in disadvantaged neighborhoods, housing assistance, access to childcare, vocational training, emergency aid." He paused. "The position includes a salary, health insurance for you and Zuri, and work hours that accommodate a school schedule." Darlene retrieved the document. She read the initial page slowly, then the second. Her eyes traversed the words, and Marcus observed them gradually filling, much like a glass when water is poured with deliberation. "I do not aspire to bestow possessions upon you, Darlene," Marcus stated. "I wish to grant you the opportunity to perform the very task you already excel at, perceiving individuals, truly perceiving them, and receiving compensation for it." She placed the document down. Her gaze shifted from the shoes to the envelope, to the offer letter, to the cityscape visible through the window, and finally to her daughter, who was drawing patterns on the table. She remained silent for a considerable duration. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. "Why?" she inquired. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at her. "Because you held a wallet containing $2,000, and all you perceived was a photograph of a boy and his mother, and that boy was me." He paused. "And that mother, she would have liked you." Something fractured within Darlene at that moment, not audibly, not in the dramatic fashion seen in films with accompanying sound and a theatrical collapse. It happened quietly, the way genuine things break. Tears streamed down her face, slow and silent, as she sat perfectly upright in her chair with her hands resting on the table and her daughter beside her. She did not cover her face. She did not turn away. She allowed the emotion to manifest. Zuri looked up. She observed her mother's face, and her small expression transformed into one of concern, immense and pure, in the way that only a 5-year-old's concern can be. "Mama, why are you weeping?" Darlene reached out and placed her hand on her daughter's head. She smoothed her hair once, then twice. "Because someone remembered your grandmother, dear." Zuri considered this with the gravity of a child processing information that surpasses her current comprehension. "Is this good crying or sad crying?" she asked. Darlene smiled through her tears, a genuine smile, the kind that demands a great deal but yields even more. "Both, dear. It is both." The ensuing weeks were tranquil ones, the sort of quiet that is not devoid but abundant, filled with new beginnings, adjustments, and the gradual, meticulous process of a life reconfiguring itself into a novel form. Darlene commenced her employment on a Monday. She arrived at the Foundation's office at 8:45, 15 minutes early, wearing the new white sneakers and an apprehension she endeavored to conceal. The office was modest, comprising 3 rooms situated above a pharmacy on the ground floor of a commercial building on the west side. 2 desks, a filing cabinet, a printer that frequently malfunctioned, and a telephone that rang more often than anticipated. Her designation was community liaison. Her responsibilities were simple in description, yet vast in application. To venture into the neighborhoods, identify mothers requiring assistance, listen to their concerns, and connect them with the resources the Foundation could provide. Leads for housing, child care subsidies, emergency food provisions, job placement, the kind of support that exists within a city like Atlanta, but remains elusive behind unanswered phone numbers and forms that no one has the time to complete. Darlene excelled in this role, not due to formal training, nor a degree in social work or prior experience in nonprofit management. She was proficient because she had once been one of them. She understood the sensation of sitting at a kitchen table at midnight, grappling with calculations that never balanced. She recognized the subtext when a mother stated, "We are fine," and truly meant, "We are in dire straits." She distinguished between the kind of assistance that makes an individual feel acknowledged and the kind that diminishes them. She went from door to door. She sat in kitchens that closely resembled her own apartment from 6 weeks prior. Small, meticulously kept, maintained through effort and a resilient sense of dignity. She sipped tea from mismatched cups and listened to women confide matters they had shared with no one else, because to confide requires trust, and trust is predicated on the feeling that the individual across from you understands. One afternoon, she visited a young mother named Sheila, who was 23 years old and had 2 children. They resided in a 1-bedroom apartment where clothes were drying on a line strung across the kitchen. Sheila apologized 3 times before Darlene had even taken a seat. "I'm sorry about the disarray. I had no time to clean. I'm sorry." Darlene placed her bag on the floor, sat at the small table and remarked, "My apartment used to resemble—" Sheila stared at her for a moment. Then her face softened subtly, the way faces do when someone has articulated precisely what a person needed to hear and had not realized they needed to hear it until its arrival. She began to weep, not audibly, but with the quiet, overwhelmed tears of a woman who had been holding everything together so tightly that the slightest relaxation of her grip brought it all to the forefront. Darlene did not hasten her. She sat and waited, offering a napkin from the holder on the table, and allowed her ample time, because she understood. She grasped the significance of being seen without judgment. She knew the weight of someone simply stating, "I comprehend." Darlene wore the new sneakers to work each day. They were white, pristine, and fit comfortably, lacking any discernible hole near the left toe. She walked in them with natural ease, both feet planted firmly, without any adjustment or attempt at concealment. And each evening upon returning home, she would remove them and place them by the front door, casting her gaze towards the shelf adjacent to the television where 2 items were displayed side by side. Her mother's photograph and the old pair of shoes. She had placed the worn footwear on the shelf next to her mother's, not due to their intrinsic value, but rather for the cherished memories they represented. Zuri was now attending a superior preschool program. This new school boasted a genuine play area, a dedicated instructor who knew each child by name, and a reading nook stocked with books that were no longer disintegrating. Darlene had successfully settled the outstanding rent. The utility bill was paid current. Their refrigerator was now stocked. It wasn't brimming, nor was it filled to the extent one might find in a more affluent household, but it was adequately supplied in a manner that truly mattered. Milk, eggs, fresh produce, poultry for the evening meal, and peanut butter accompanied by bread. The kind of replenishment that assures the following day's needs are met. However, the most significant transformation wasn't in material possessions. It was more subtle, less conspicuous. For the first time in many years, Darlene retired for the night without her mind racing through financial calculations, without the silent, persistent arithmetic that had dominated her thoughts for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to think without it. How much was the rent? How much was the electricity? How many hours until the next wage disbursement? Could I manage? Could I manage? Could I manage? The calculations had ceased, and in their absence, something else had taken root. Not outright joy, precisely. Darlene was far too pragmatic for such an expansive term, but something akin to it. A sensation akin to standing on firm ground after years of precarious balancing on an unstable surface. The burden in her chest hadn't vanished. It likely never would entirely. Lorraine would forever remain Lorraine, and the ache of her absence was an integral part of Darlene's present identity. Yet, something had subtly shifted. The emotional weight had found a settled position, and for the first time in a considerable period, its pressure felt less intense. Marcus underwent his own evolution, though his was a more gradual process, more arduous, akin to the slow progression of weighty objects. Not a sudden shift, but an incremental one, because the defenses he had erected were more substantial than Darlene's, having stood for a longer duration, and dismantling them demanded something he hadn't practiced in decades: self-compassion. He discontinued his morning meals in the formal dining area. He relocated to the small table situated in the kitchen, the one adjacent to the window where Mrs. Tillman maintained a plant she tended to daily. This table accommodated 2 individuals. He occupied a seat there alone, yet paradoxically, the solitude felt different in that setting. Less pronounced, less like a definitive judgment, and more like a circumstantial reality that held the potential for future alteration. He began frequenting the neighborhoods where the foundation actively engaged. Not for formal consultations or public relations events, he simply visited. He drove his Honda Accord across the city on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, parking on adjacent streets, entering community centers, and occupying plastic chairs in waiting areas, absorbing the ambient sounds of a world he had departed from 3 decades prior, but never fully detached from. He made no grand announcements of his presence. He didn't introduce himself as the individual whose name graced the financial contributions. He wore unpretentious attire and remained quiet, observing individuals navigate their daily routines with the distinct vitality characteristic of those managing burdens far exceeding what any single person should bear alone. One Thursday, at a community center located on the city's west side, Marcus was seated in the corridor adjacent to a meeting room where a support group for single mothers was in session. Darlene was inside, leading the session. He could discern her voice through the door, steady and warm, posing questions and attentive to the responses. A young boy took a seat beside him. He appeared to be approximately 8 years old. His backpack rested on the floor between his feet, and a worksheet lay on his lap, clutched in a manner that suggested a desire to fling it across the room. Marcus observed him. "What are you working on?" The boy didn't raise his head. "Mathematics." "I detest it." Marcus nearly offered a smile. Almost. Then an internal shift occurred, transforming the near smile into a genuine expression. A smile, small, understated, yet authentic. The first genuine smile he had experienced on his face in longer than he could recall. "May I see?" Marcus inquired. The boy gave a slight shrug and slid the worksheet over. Multiplication. 3-digit numbers. The kind of challenges that seem insurmountable when you are 8 years old, sitting alone in a hallway while your mother engages with strangers about matters beyond your comprehension. Marcus drew his chair closer. Allow me to demonstrate something. Observe this figure here. Deconstruct it into its constituent parts. It becomes more manageable when divided into smaller segments. They sat together for 20 minutes. Marcus guided him through each problem sequentially, much like his own mother had once assisted him with homework at a kitchen table, in a structure that bore a striking resemblance to this one. The boy's pencil moved with increased fluency. His posture relaxed. By the time they reached the final problem, he too was on the verge of smiling. As Marcus rose to depart, the boy looked at him with the open, unreserved gaze of a child not yet acquainted with suspicion towards kindness. "You're quite adept at this," the boy remarked. "You should become a teacher." Marcus exited the community center and stood on the pavement, bathed in the fading afternoon light, pressing the back of his hand against his eyes. He remained there for a brief interval. Just a moment. Then he drew a breath and proceeded to his vehicle. That evening, he entered his study. He opened his wallet and retrieved a photograph. His mother, himself at 10 years old, the brick edifice, the fractured step. He had carried this image within his wallet for over 2 decades. Close, yet concealed. Ever present, but seldom observed. A memento that had evolved into a routine rather than a memory. He placed it on the corner of his desk, facing upwards, visible where it would greet him each morning upon arrival and each evening upon departure, where it could bear witness to him and where he could be observed. He gazed at his mother's visage through the protective glass of the small frame he had purchased that afternoon from a shop en route home. He regarded the boy he had once been, before Curtis, before Nadine, before the emotional barricade. He was not an altered individual. He was simply in the slow process of becoming the person he had been before the walls were erected. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in October, the foundation inaugurated a new community center on the western periphery of Atlanta. It was not an ostentatious grand opening. There were no media representatives, no ceremonial ribbon cutting with oversized scissors, simply a structure that had undergone renovation and repainting, now furnished with items of genuine importance. A room dedicated to tutoring, a childcare area equipped with soft mats and illustrated books, a kitchen designated for twice-weekly culinary workshops, and a meeting space with chairs arranged in a circle for the support groups that Darlene had been facilitating in temporary locations for months. The neighborhood buzzed with activity that morning in the distinct manner that certain urban blocks in particular districts come alive, with music emanating from a speaker positioned on the front steps, children darting between the legs of adults, and women conversing in small clusters with the comfortable familiarity of those who have shared their struggles for a duration sufficient to cease feigning ignorance of their existence. A lengthy table had been arranged outdoors, laden with food, homemade fare, macaroni and cheese presented in foil containers, collard greens, cornbread, and a sheet cake adorned with yellow frosting, which 2 of the mothers from the program had collaboratively baked the preceding evening. It was not catered. It was not sophisticated. It was authentic. Darlene stood near the entrance. She wore the white athletic shoes Marcus had gifted her and a simple dress she had acquired with her own funds from her personal earnings. She stood with her hands at her sides, her gaze fixed on something adorning the wall just inside the doorway, a plaque. Small, unadorned, mounted at eye level, it proclaimed the Lorraine Washington Community Center. Darlene had been unaware. Marcus had not informed her. She had learned the name of the center that morning upon her arrival, having come early to arrange chairs, and had encountered the plaque for the first time. She had remained before it for an extended period, motionless. She reached out now and brushed her fingertips against the lettering, the L, the W. She traced them deliberately, much like one traces an object they wish to verify as tangible. Zuri stood beside her, holding her hand, her eyes fixed on the plaque with the focused intensity of a child deciphering something significant. "Mama, that's Grandma's name." Darlene knelt, bringing herself to her daughter's eye level. She gently smoothed Zuri's hair. Yes, sweetie. That is Grandma's name. Is Grandma here? Darlene surveyed the plaque, then the building, then the children animatedly moving through the interior rooms, the mothers positioned in the doorway, the spread of food, and the speaker broadcasting music from the steps. Yes, sweetie, she responded softly. I believe she is. She stood upright, and it was at this juncture that she noticed Marcus. He was positioned a few feet away, not in formal attire, but in dark trousers and a simple shirt, his hands tucked into his pockets. He presented a different demeanor than the man who had occupied her kitchen months prior, not entirely dissimilar, but his eyes held a distinct change. There was a newfound quality within them, not precisely happiness, something more tranquil than that, something warmer, like a room where the illumination has finally been activated. A young girl, perhaps 6 years old, ran past them, halted, and regarded Darlene with the profound directness characteristic of a child unfamiliar with evasiveness. Miss Darlene, does this place belong to you? Darlene smiled. It doesn't belong to me, dear. It belongs to everyone. The girl contemplated this statement with considerable gravity. Then she gave a single nod. Well, it's the finest place on this street. And with that, she departed, hurrying back through the entrance and into the building, her shoes making a rhythmic sound against the new flooring. Marcus stepped forward and stood alongside Darlene, not ahead, not behind, beside her. They both contemplated the plaque, the inscription, and the light streaming through the adjacent window, casting a warm, steady glow upon the letters. From within the building, the sounds of children could be heard, laughter, small voices, and the occasional clatter of chairs being adjusted by individuals making themselves at home in a space created for them. I believe she would have appreciated this establishment, Marcus remarked quietly. Darlene met his gaze. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, with a clarity surpassing that of sorrow. The specific luminescence of an individual who has borne a substantial burden for an extended period and has finally discovered a place to set it down. She would have liked you, Darlene stated. Marcus remained silent for a beat. The afternoon sun traversed the pavement between them. A gentle breeze wafted through, warm and languid, carrying the aroma of cornbread from the outdoor table. Tell me about her, he requested. Darlene's smile broadened, encompassing her entire face with a radiance akin to sunlight filtering through water. Slow, warm, abundant. She would have brewed you tea in a mismatched cup, she recounted, and instructed you to sit down and cease looking so serious. Marcus chuckled. Not a polished practice sound, not the carefully measured vocalization he had employed at formal gatherings and dinners for years, but a genuine laugh, brief, unexpected, and honest, the kind that escapes before one can suppress it. And so she spoke, and he listened. And for the first time in a considerable duration, neither of them was alone. I trust this narrative has resonated with you as profoundly as it has with me. Please like, share, subscribe, and let me know in the comment section what you would have done with that wallet. Inform me of your viewing location. I look forward to seeing you in the next installment.